Good morning and a very special welcome to the quarterfinals of the 2026 Public Sector Debate Competition. I am Tomika Gunmighty, Communication Specialist here at the Transformation Implementation Unit and your host for this morning's match. We are delighted to have you here and we extend a warm welcome to our virtual audience tuning in from near and far to be a part of this exciting showcase of public sector talent and innovation. If you're just joining us, you missed the first match in this round where the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade cemented their place in the semi-finals. Which of these two teams will join them? We have with us, continuing the action this morning, the Accountant General's Department and the National Environment and Planning Agency, and they will be debating the moot. Be it resolved that the influence of the church over public policy in Jamaica is to be celebrated. I repeat, be it resolved that the influence of the church over public policy in Jamaica is to be celebrated. Which one of these teams will convert the congregation? Let us meet the teams, starting with the Accountant General's Department.
Hello, good morning. Brandon Lee Fagan, first speaker.
Morning, everyone. Ashani Daniel Granville.
Ricardo Brooks, good morning.
Thank you so much to the Accountant General's team. We now turn our attention to the team from the National Environment and Planning Agency as they introduce themselves.
Good morning, Sabrina Urbano, first speaker.
Good morning, Camille Douglas Stevenson, second speaker.
Good morning, Kayla Smith, third speaker.
Thank you so much to the team from the National Environment and Planning Agency. Today's adjudicators are our partners from the Jamaica Association for Debating and Empowerment, and we ask that our judges introduce themselves.
Thank you, Tomika. Good morning, brothers and sisters. I'm Jermaine Barrett, and I'll be the chair, or should I say the head preacher, in this debate. I'm going to wish you all the very best in the debate to come.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dakar Nelson. Firstly, hearty congratulations to both teams on making it to the quarterfinals, and all the very best in this match.
Morning, everybody. Kenisha Nelson. I'll be one of your wing adjudicators. All the best, teams.
Amen. Okay. Thank you so much to our judges. I now turn over to the judges. Both teams know the rules, are familiar with the rules. All the best to both teams.
Thank you, Tomika. You are, in fact, very much aware of the rules, but our viewing audience might not be so familiar, so we'll go through them nevertheless. We have on each team 3 debaters. The first debater will speak for 7 minutes, the second debater speaks for 6 minutes, and the third debater will make their presentation within 5 minutes. After the first 2 speeches have been heard, we enter a period of cross-examination. We'll enter another period of cross-examination after the second pair of speeches have been delivered. Thereafter, we'll pause for 1 minute, and then after the 1 minute pause, we will continue the debate with the reply speeches, beginning with that from the opposition team. Then the debate concludes with the third and final speech from the proposition team. Debaters, please be mindful of the time signals. The first and last minutes of your speeches are protected. You'll hear a ding of the bell to indicate same, and you'll hear 2 dings of the bell when you've consumed the allotted time. And then 15 seconds thereafter, you'll hear continuous dinging of the bell, signaling that you really should stop. All right? That applies specifically to the first 2 speakers on either team, because between the first 2 dings of the bell, points of information are allowed. In fact, they're very much encouraged. All right? Teams, do you have any questions? All right, I hear no questions, so let's get this debate started. But before we do so, I invite the Cardiego to read our moot.
All right, so the motion before the congregation is as follows. Be it resolved that the influence of the church over public policy in Jamaica is to be celebrated. Just again for our audience. Be it resolved that the influence of the church over public policy in Jamaica is to be celebrated.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, we call upon the first speaker from the proposition team, the Accountant General's Department, to open this debate. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, esteemed judges, ladies and gentlemen, good day. In Jamaica, the decision that shapes the nation has never been influenced solely by elected officials. It has come from the people and the institutions they trust. The church is one of those institutions. As said, the mood today be resolved, the influence of the church over public policy in Jamaica is to be celebrated. We are proud to propose. First, some definitions. When we talk about the church, we mean organized Christianity and its multiple denominations. Public policy refers to the decisions, laws, priorities established by government that guide how a society addresses key issues such as social welfare, education, crime, and health. In the aspect of influence, we refer to the ability to shape, guide, or affect key decisions through advocacy, consultation, and public engagement. And to celebrate, we mean to recognize, value, and appreciate. So as first speaker, I will establish the democratic and legitimate basis for the church's influence over public policy in Jamaica. I will also advance the argument that the church's influence has, on balance, positively shaped Jamaica's policy and development and assess its critical role in social cohesion. My second speaker will show how the church's influence has led to tangible and positive developments in education, health, social welfare, community stabilization, proving that it remains a valuable and beneficial force worthy of celebration. Our reply speaker will deliver the final blessing, proving beyond doubt that the church's influence ought to be celebrated. Mr. Speaker, we acknowledge that the church's influence has not always been perfect, and there have been instances that have raised questions and debate, but contended on balance and through its evident capacity for self-correction and reflection towards higher moral values and attitudes, the church's influence has resulted in net positive in Jamaica. Additionally, we celebrate the influence because it is earned influence. The burden on the opposition, therefore, is to not identify few controversial positions. It is to prove that overall, the church's influence on public policy has done more harm than good. So our case rests on three pillars. First being the church influence over public policy is democratic and legitimate. The most recent census data from the Statistical Institute of Jamaica indicates that more than 70% of the population self-identifies as Christians in Jamaica. This means that a majority of these persons subscribe and profess the Christian faith, even if they don't go to church every Sunday. Mr. Speaker, we suggest that a democratic matter, the influence of the people who make up the majority of the Jamaican population is materially important because this influence has been overwhelmingly positive. That democratic influence also has deep historical roots because the relationship between church and public policy in Jamaica did not begin yesterday. That is how majority of Jamaican people want it. Therefore, the idea of religious influence being separate from public policy, not ready for yet, would be foreign to Jamaica's tradition. In a democracy, public policy is formed through consultation. Businesses influence policy. Trade unions influence policy. Non-government agencies and organizations influence policy, and churches influence policy too. The voices of the majority of citizens are represented through these institutions they trust. The churches are one of these institutions. The second point, the church's influence over public policy has positively advanced social welfare, national priorities, and the country's moral framework. The church's influence has quite literally been a rally cry towards freedom and liberation, where during slavery, Baptist ministries such as William Knibb and national hero Sam Sharp challenged one of the greatest injustices in human history. Through advocacy
Point of information.
Go ahead.
Is this the same church whose missionaries came with the Bible in one hand and colonial law in the other, including the 1864 Act that still criminalizes women today?
So, as I said in the beginning, and as I'm going to say in further in my speech, yes, there might be some aspects that you would frown upon the church, but through self-reflection and continuous deliberation, the church has improved on what they currently do. So, through advocacy and public pressure and appeals to British lawmakers, they helped create the conditions that facilitated emancipation. After emancipation, the churches established schools, supported free villages, promoted literacy, and helped former enslaved people build independent lives. In other words, the church's influence over public policy helped to lay the foundation for the independent society we have today. The freedom we have to debate, to vote, and shape public policy did not come from thin air. That was the church's influence. Mr. Speaker, the church's influence over public policy shapes Jamaica's conscience. When issues of corruption and accountability, crime and governance, social issues arise, the churches are called upon for their guidance. You may ask why? Because the government recognized that the church's influence means credibility and decency to scores of Jamaicans. Additionally, our churches have credibility on moral authority within these communities, especially rural areas. So why wouldn't we want to celebrate an institution that is deeply ingrained in the moral life of our citizens? Take some recent example where in 2025, the Jamaica Council of Churches publicly opposed proposals to remove the Auditor General from the Integrity Commission, advocating instead for transparency and accountability in public life. Or in 2026, the churches group reviewed and commented on the National Reconstruction Bill, supporting the objective to improve disaster response while raising concerns about transparency and concentration of power. This would speak to the governance and accountability framework. It was also the church and the clergymen that influenced the creation of the Peace Management Initiative, National Prayer Breakfast, and various fora advocating for family health. My third point that I'll jump to is through advocacy for mentorship programs, counseling, youth outreach, and partnership with community policy initiatives, the church has influenced how public policy on a national security has evolved. Churches have influenced policies that promote prevention, rehabilitation, and community engagement rather than simply punishment alone. Mr. Speaker, public policy can only be effective when their citizens buy in. It is therefore important that the churches be at the table, influencing and shaping these policies. That helps to understand these policies, promote compliance to them, and support national effort. That makes public policy more effective. This is to be celebrated. Mr. Speaker, cherry-picking disagreements over the church's role in national life should not erase decades of positive influence on freedom, governance, and community development. When we assess the church's influence over public policy, both honestly and fairly, the conclusion is clear. The church has helped shape Jamaica's values and strengthen our society. That is something to be recognized, that is something to value, and that is something to be celebrated. I thank you.
We thank the first speaker on the proposition side and now invite to open the opposition's case. The first opposition speaker, here.
Mr. Chairman, honorable adjudicators, worthy opponents, good day. The church makes genuine contributions to society, charity, mentorship, and outreach. We acknowledge them, but acknowledgement is not a free-for-all. Contribution does not buy policy-making authority over Jamaica. Meet Poochie, 14 years old, from the inner city. Every Sunday, she sits in a pew. A convicted gunman called Gal Juice got her pregnant. The church backbenched her, barred her from the choir. She was told by the church that the shame was hers, but the government kept her in school through their reintegration policy. They provided antenatal care. Her family did not fall through the cracks through the PART program. The government lifted her up, and the church shamed her. This debate hangs on 4 words. Influence, which means the effect that someone has on a person's thoughts and behavior. Church, as an organized body of Christian believers. Policy is a course of action pursued by a government, and celebrate means worthy of praise.
Point of information.
Not at this time. Team proposition mentions democratic and legitimacy. We are saying, as opposition, you can vote out a minister. You cannot vote out a pastor. When the minister defers to the church, the decision maker is the church. And when the line back to the people is severed permanently. No election corrects a charter clause written under church pressure. They mention equality, and the 1864 Act. We're saying that the church, yes, it can self-correct, but however, the self-correction over decades is not accountability.
Point of information.
Not at this time. That act is 162 years of self-correction that has not yet arrived. And Jamaican women cannot wait for the church to evolve. You talk about social cohesion. Social cohesion, does Pucci feel the social cohesion right now? She's
I'd love to answer.
backbenched.
Point of information.
Not at this time. She's ostracized and made to feel less than. As first speaker, I will prove two arguments. First, the church is fragmented. It cannot speak with one voice. Second, it undermines democracy. It creates permanent harm without remedy. My second speaker will show how church influence causes policy paralysis, direct harm, and unequal citizenship. My third speaker will consolidate, rebut the important clashes, and win this house. First argument, the church is fragmented. The mood says the church. One body, one voice. We are here to destroy that statement with evidence. May 2024, the Global United Church removed its ban on LGBTQ clergy. The same year, the Methodist Church in the Caribbean reaffirmed its opposition to homosexuality. One body, two opposing views, not one voice. June 2025, the Tarrant Baptist Church and its affiliate, Balmagie Baptist Church, voted to cut ties with the Jamaica Baptist Union.
Point of information.
Not at this time. The dispute ended in court, a fight over who owned the church building. Mr. Speaker, if they cannot agree on property ownership, how can we trust their ability to agree on public policy?
A point of information.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so citing extremist breakaway fringe groups does not defeat the argument. The church remains united. The Baptist Church as one institution is intact. You're citing extremist views that have broken away because they want to advance extremist ideas.
I would like to say to you, team proposition, that the mood says the influence of the church, not one breakaway fringe, as you would like to term it. We're talking about the church. The Christianity in its entirety, that's what we're talking about. The Jamaica Umbrella Church of Churches, the body formed to speak as one, operates under the mantra unity, not uniformity. I see fracture in their founding principle. Within the JUGC, evangelicals and Pentecostal members want hanging to resume. Anglican and Catholic members are against capital punishment, and they cannot agree on the consequence of murder. In 2020, the Arcus Foundation commissioned a mapping report on faith and public policy across the Caribbean. The Jamaica Council of Churches was listed as an ally to human rights advancement. However, the Lawyers Christian Fellowship was listed as a barrier. Two Christian groups, same faith, opposing views, documented in the same report. Here is how this works in practice. When a government minister faces a policy decision, such as access to abortion, capital punishment, or LGBTQ rights, and seeks the church for guidance, there is not a unified answer. There are competing groups, each saying they speak for God.
Point of information.
Not at this time. The minister does not get a unified moral authority. This leaves the minister to select the denomination with the loudest voice, most political weight, who friend up the minister wins.
Point of information.
Not at this time. Their preference then becomes binding policy on all citizens. Their choice is not based on principle. It is not democratic. Forget transparency. It is unelected power pulling the strings. The Bible itself says God is not the author of confusion. A government that chooses to partake in a dish of chaos when making policy is unjust. 31.1% of citizens in Jamaica are non-Christian. That is 3 in 10, which live under laws shaped by institution that does not represent them. There is no mechanism to challenge the outcome. That influence is not worthy of praise. The proposition can't tell us which church they are celebrating. The evidence shows there is no single church to celebrate. Argument 2, the church, not at this time. The church undermines democracy. Democracy is government by all the people. Unelected religious authority is not replacement. The consequences when it functions in unity are permanent. The Offences Act, the Person Act of 1864, makes abortion a crime with life imprisonment as the penalty. They survived independence, survived the 2011 Charter of Rights, survived the 2023 constitutional reform. And why? Minister Marlene Mallohu Fort stood in Parliament and said the quiet part out loud. No part to collide with the church, even in the presence of challenges. To thunderous applause. This is your democracy in action. Yes. In 2011, Jamaica rewrote its Charter of Fundamental Rights. The church was vocal. It lobbied Parliament to block any non-discrimination clause on sexual orientation. The Charter now contains a built-in hierarchy of citizens. Some citizens receive full protection and others do not. Their hierarchy was not decided by a court that heard evidence. It was not decided by government ministers debating metrics. It was not decided by the church that was never elected, never audited, and never had to face the people it governs. Here is the mechanism by which it works. In a democracy, when a policy causes harm, citizens have redress. They can vote out the minister who passed it. They can go to court to challenge it. Accountability is the goal. From the citizens to the parliamentarian, this makes the democratic process legitimate. We will not celebrate that, and we oppose the move. Thank you very much.
We thank the first opposition speaker for her spirited contribution. We now move to the first segment of cross-examination. In this segment, the opposition team NEPO, gets a chance to ask 3 questions of the Accountant General's Department, the proposition team. Each of those questions is limited to 10 seconds. Each response limited to 45 seconds. Team NEPO, you may begin.
Thank you. If morality alone justifies policy influence, whose morality should govern citizens who do not share that faith? The 31% of Jamaicans that we're talking about here.
Yeah. So in a democracy, the majority rules, and the minority is protected under the Constitution. But when you have a process of consultation, it is the majority's view that wins out. The fact that that makes you uncomfortable doesn't make it undemocratic. So because you're uncomfortable with the buggery laws, or abortion laws, that does not make it illegitimate. It is the democratic will of the people of Jamaica advanced through an institution that they trust, that is codified in law. Next question.
Thank you. Should laws be based on evidence and public interest or on scripture?
So the laws are based on evidence. As I just said to you, there's a consultative process. I'm sure you're familiar with the Joint Select Committee of Parliament. They consider submissions based on evidence, based on moral principles, based on the ethos and moral values of a society, and then pass laws. Again, it's how democracy works. Familiarize yourself with it.
The church lectures the nation on morality while its own leaders have been convicted of sexual abuse of children and financial fraud. Do you celebrate the influence of an institution that cannot police its own house?
I'm sure Brandon already answered that question. That there are conceivably negative aspects of the church, and we've also said to you that where these things happen, the church has shown a remarkable capacity for self-correction. The Pope has apologized for slavery. The Archbishop of Canterbury has established a justice reparations fund to right the wrongs of slavery. And we think because it's so inherently self-correcting, it should be celebrated because it reflects, it changes, it evolves, it's democratic.
We thank you for engaging in this phase of cross-examination. We continue now with the questions coming from the proposition team. Team proposition, you may now pose your questions to the opposition team.
If the church contribution to social stability, public service, and presented a large proportion, sorry, can I restart? Sorry. If the church contributes to social stability, public service, and represents a large portion of the population, what basis should the influence not be celebrated?
Member, I would ask you to recognize that we are asked specifically in this mood to discuss the church, as in the Christian church, and its celebrated influence over policy against most other groups. So what we would say to you is that, are you going to in fact celebrate just as equally all those other groups, all those NGOs?
So, as a democratic matter, explain to us why it is illegitimate for a group that represents the majority of people and their belief systems to not have influence over the laws that govern the majority of people.
Team proposition, we'd like to say that the majority preference is not democratic legitimacy. All right, so even though you talk about majority, you still have not mentioned the 31.1% of those who are not non-Christians that are not represented.
The democratic process includes involving everybody's opinion, not just the churches. So you have to weigh everybody's opinion on the same scale, not just show preference to the church's doctrine.
Which is exactly why it cannot receive the celebrated influence.
You raised Poochie, who got pregnant by the gunman. Can you tell me why you've discounted the fact that the Missionaries of the Poor also supports pregnant women?
We have not discounted it at all. We actually praise the church for all of the support and the encouragement that they do. All of that work is charitable, and it is in fact exactly as the church should do.
And Poochie was also ostracized by the same church that she faithfully attended every Sunday. So she was meant to feel that she was less than the rest of the population, even though they gave her some charity.
And let me remind you, Team Proposition, we're talking about the influence of the church, not whether or not they do good charity or whatnot. We're talking about the influence on the policy. Keep it together.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. So, that's it.
All right, thank you very much for the cross-examination. We continue now. This time we invite the second speaker from the proposition team representing the Accountant General's Department to present, to advance their team's case. Here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is very clear that there is a high amount of anti-Christian bias coming from the opposition. They need to be severely prayed for. Imagine, they came up here, they mentioned that the church is criminalizing women without any form of evidence. How does the church criminalize women? No form of evidence was presented, so I can't even answer for that. Ridiculousness. They mentioned that the church is trying to buy influence over policy in Jamaica. Nothing could be further from the truth. The truth, Mr. Speaker, is that the church has earned every ounce of the influence that they enjoy within this country. The church is not an arm of the state, but we contend that they are critical stakeholders. We further contend that the church has earned their influence through their consistent performance in Jamaica. And I have all the facts to prove it. Mr. Speaker, encouragement sweetens labor. We are calling for the church to be celebrated, not because they are a perfect body that failed Poochie. We are calling on the church to be celebrated because on balance over the entirety of our history, the church has been critical to our social consciousness and has made tangible investments to the social fabric of our society, many of which still stand today as a testament to the church's congregational social responsibility. Mr. Speaker, my focus will be on showing the practicality of the church's influence over public policy and how this involvement has strengthened the social framework of the country, even in the 21st century. I will further demonstrate that what congregational social responsibility looks like and why having an appreciation for these works and celebrating same will lead to even more work being done, especially in the areas of education, healthcare, and poverty reduction. In our post-colonial society, Mr. Speaker, the government could not adequately respond to the social needs of the nation. Therefore, it was the churches who stepped in and made invaluable, indeed often tangible contributions to our society, all of which were in line with the policy initiatives of the government. Let's consider education. The church has built and often runs many prominent schools in line with the government's national standards curriculum. That is policy. This is how the church has earned their influence, and it must be celebrated. Mr. Speaker, former Minister of Education, ironically a clergyman himself, Reverend Ronald Thwaites, wrote in a Gleaner article dated April 4, 2022, quote, "A third of all Jamaican schools at all levels are owned or sponsored by 11 Christian denominations and a few trusts. Nearly 700 Now consider the fact that there are 1,010 public schools in Jamaica. Look at the high percentage of schools that were built by the church. Imagine if they were not around to subsidize education. Further to that, Mr. Speaker, let's consider Manning School, founded in 1738, Westwood High School, founded in 1812, Glenmuir High School, founded in 1953. 3 schools built by different denominational groups, but there are only 3 of the 11 high schools, 112 primary schools, 9 prep schools, and the 1 college at the Anglican Church alone, that single denomination alone, has built in Jamaica. Now consider, Mr. Speaker, that these centers of academic excellence are all in line with the National Standards Curriculum, which is the current curriculum framework for schools set by the Ministry of Education to modernize teaching and learning and better prepare students for a 21st century. That is progress, and that should be celebrated. The church used their influence and their technical know-how to advise on the formulation of this education policy that places greater emphasis on critical thinking, creativity, and integrates STEM across all aspects of modern subjects. Most importantly, the church used their influence to help to get the policy to be widely understood and accepted. In what world would Jamaican academic influence, the very few of the church's influence over the NSC, not be a reasonable thing to celebrate? Mr. Speaker, time would not even allow me to mention the many healthcare initiatives that the church has been involved in. The building of the Andrews Memorial, Nuttall Memorial, St. Joseph Hospital. These institutions helped the government during COVID time to implement the disaster risk management enforcement measures. Mr. Speaker, long before NIX existed, and continuing ever since, the church has founded and funded many social charities. We know their name: the Salvation Army, Mustard Seed Communities, Jacob's Ladder. In fact, some of these founders themselves have received the Order of Jamaica from the government as a means of celebrating their good works. How could we be against that? So in conclusion, if we were only to celebrate the perfect, we would not celebrate anybody but the Creator. We celebrate the church, not because they are perfect, but because encouragement sweetens labor, and the church has labored for the betterment of Jamaica and our society. I thank you.
Thank you very much, second speaker on the proposition bench or team. We now call upon the second speaker on the opposition team to advance the opposition's case. Hear, hear.
Honorable adjudicators, worthy opponents, good day. As people of faith ourselves, we know the important role religion plays in the lives of many of our Jamaicans, but contribution doesn't create public policy-making authority. Members, this debate must be decided on outcomes, not on intentions or symbolism. Now let's begin with policy paralysis. We've shown you the mechanism: pressure on the elected government, politicians fearing backlash, and the result? The reform becomes politically costly, policies are delayed, weakened, or abandoned. This is the policy paralysis. And let's use an international example in the US. 1973, Roe versus Wade established constitutional protection for abortion access. And in 2022, Dobbs versus Jackson overturned this after decades of organized religious and political advocacy. We saw multiple states implementing severe restrictions on reproductive health care. Dobbs illustrates how the organized religious influence over decades can shape a public policy. Members, this is not about abortion, it is about the governance. And doctrine-led influence makes evidence politically expensive and turns public policy into a test of doctrine rather than the outcomes.
Point of information.
Not at this time. Now let's look at public harm. You remember Poochie? We know good governance depends on governments responding rationally to evidence. But in the propositions world, the evidence must survive the religious approval grounded in doctrine. We see this in Jamaica. Historically, our sexual education and reproductive health discussions have faced resistance from influential religious groups. And why does this matter? It matters because when sexual education becomes politically controversial and governments delay or weaken the implementation, the results are harmful. According to the UNFPA, 18% of all births in Jamaica occur to teenagers, and the adolescent fertility rate was reported at 72 births per 1,000 girls. 40% of Jamaican women were found in a Jamaican study to have become pregnant before 20, and 80%, not at this time, of adolescent pregnancies were unplanned. Poochie is not an exception. Poochie is the reason these statistics matter. That is the mechanism, exactly where the harm occurs. Jamaica's adult HIV prevalence is approximately 1.1%, one of the highest rates in the English-speaking Caribbean. HIV does not respond to theology. It responds to testing, education, and prevention and healthcare access. Nearly half of Jamaicans living with HIV report stigma and discrimination, and that matters because it discourages the testing, the delaying of the treatment, and increases in transmission.
Point of information.
Global policy, not at this time. UNAIDS identifies stigma as a barrier to HIV prevention, and World Health Organization support this comprehensive sexuality education. All evidence that it reduces risky sexual behavior and reduces sexually transmitted infections and even delays sexual initiation, not at this time. Theology certainly did not create these challenges, but when policymakers must first secure the religious approval, evidence-based solutions become slower, weaker, and harder to implement. Any public health policy should be judged by measurable outcomes, not by moral discomfort. Otherwise, we create governance failure. Now, let's look at unequal citizenship. Jamaica does not contain one moral viewpoint, and that is key. We are out of many one people.
Point of information.
Jamaica adopted, not at this time, the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms in 2011. Recall the 31%? When one religious worldview receives privileged influence over the policies binding all citizens, the interests of that 31% become harder to advance, and they matter. Reforms that conflict with dominant doctrine become politically untouchable, and that's not inclusive governance, that is selective governance. What our dearest proposition calls morality is really unequal citizenship, and morality without the measurable equality, safety, and social progress becomes symbolism rather than successful governance. Now let's look at the comparative analysis. The outcomes we describe are not hypothetical. We have the global evidence. Finland, Sweden, Denmark consistently rank among the world's highest performers in human development, social trust, transparency, and institutional effectiveness. They demonstrate critically that successful governance does not require privileged church influence over public policy making, even in predominantly Christian societies. Costa Rica brings it closer to home now. They maintain a strong religious tradition while achieving democratic stability and strong human development without granting the churches privileged influence over policy making. The issue is not church or religion itself, it is the governance outcomes produced when religious influence dominates public policy. And let's look at that necessity test. There is one question the proposition has never answered, and that is why their model is necessary. Churches have influence in elections through members. They participate in civil society. And let's go back to one of your points. Now, when we look at it, contribution is valid, but it is not a blank check for policymaking authority. The Red Cross feeds people in disasters. We don't give them a seat to write the immigration law. Charity and governance are different functions, and conflating them is the proposition's error. Church is mentor these youths, and it's not the same thing as shaping national policy. So what unique governance benefit comes from celebrating the church influence over public policy? And if proposition cannot answer that question, then ask yourself, when Poochie needed the help, who protected her? Reintegration policy, public health intervention, evidence-based government action. Proposition cannot identify a benefit that only privileged church influence can produce. So why and how can they ask us to accept the additional risk without creating the additional value? No. Proposition has shown contribution and we have shown the outcomes. Adjudicators stand with the outcomes that protect Poochie. Faith should guide personal morality, but moral voice is not equal to policy-making authority. Let the pulpit decide and guide the faith. It should not become a second parliament. I rest my case.
Thank you, second opposition speaker. We'll move now to the second segment of cross-examination. In this segment, the proposition team gets a chance first to ask questions of the opposition team. Team proposition, you may begin.
You cite policy paralysis. Can you point to one area where the church's influence in Jamaica has led to policy paralysis?
The reform of the Offense Against the Persons Act, which makes abortion illegal, and there are many cases that have been cited medically, socially, as to why that is harmful to women. Yeah, you end up having back alley operations to get rid of children that are unwanted, or you've been raped and you need to mentally come to terms with that and you need an abortion, or you can't carry the child to term safely, and that is illegal, punishable by death.
Team proposition, we'd also like to say that Act still stands today in 2026. It has not been revoked.
Yeah. So you talk a lot about the interest of the minority. When we have consultative processes before the parliament, J-Flag, civil society groups, minority groups, Rastafarians, they appear before the parliament and give their viewpoint. So what is this paralysis?
I'm so grateful that you mentioned all of these entities having a voice in the democratic process. We are talking in this moot about church, and I think this is where proposition has missed the mark. Church has a definition that goes back to Christianity, not Rastafarianism, not Hindu, not Muslim, not J-Flags. It goes back to Christianity.
And we have to talk about the fact that the church actually showed up to defend the bugger law in the Supreme Court so that it cannot be referred, it cannot be. And J-Flag did not have that ability. J-Flag did not get to go into and have policy stop. The government, we just said in the first speech that the ministers said that they're not going to risk colliding with the church.
That's factually incorrect. However, going on to the question, Mr. Speaker, how does the opposition contend with the fact that the government has not always sided with the church? We have seen instances where...
I will allow you to ask the question, just keep it within the 10-second limit.
We've seen instances where the church has opposed things like casino gambling generally on a Sunday, and the government has gone ahead with it anyway. So...
May we have the question?
Yes, so then the question is, how do you contend with the fact that the government does not always side with the church?
What our moot is asking us to do is to now give the church celebrated influence over public policy making. That's different. They haven't had the celebrated policy.
And the only time that the church has not won the argument is when economics has come into play and it's more beneficial. You cited the casinos, right? And so there's no economic benefit to making LGBTQ persons be a recognized group of citizens. There is none.
All right, thank you. Thank you for those questions and the answers as well. We are now going to allow the opposition team to pose their questions to team proposition.
Thank you. If two churches take opposite positions on an issue, whose morality becomes the national policy?
The morality of the lawmakers.
We are happy that you recognize the fact that the churches do not always agree on a particular position. A lot of things within the society are actually nuanced arguments. The church does not have the final say on policy. They have a right to influence and they have a right to advise. And the government, the democratically elected government, has the final say on these matters.
The IDB calculated in 2020 that LGBTQ plus exclusion driven by religiously informed policy cost Jamaica roughly 60.5% of GDP annually. At what price does celebration become complicity?
At the price of democracy. The fact that it makes you uncomfortable doesn't make it undemocratic. It's the majoritarian view. And the fact that the LGBT lobby can go before the parliament and before the courts, you are factually incorrect to say J-Flag was not a party to the court challenge, does not make it undemocratic. They have a voice. Nobody has silenced them. J-Flag goes before the parliament all the time. They lobby lawmakers all the time. The lawmakers exist to serve the interests of the majority of people who put them there. That is democracy. And the Constitution already codifies a whole host of protections that the majority of our people already decided are beyond democratic challenge.
Public consultations are open to all social groups, not just the church. I don't know where you're going with this.
That's right? No, there's one more. There's one more. Yeah.
If stronger church influence automatically reduce crime, why do some of the most religious countries in the world still struggle with violence, corruption, and organized crime?
So we never said that stronger church influence reduces crime. What Ashani told you is that the influence of the church has altered how crime fighting has happened in terms of moving toward a rehabilitative model of crime fighting, which is to be celebrated. I hope you would agree with that it is a positive, that the church wants improved conditions in prison, that the church doesn't want extrajudicial killings, that the church wants laws to, as you said, be evidence-based. You've created straw men and then tried to attack them. We have not made those arguments, my friend.
And notice in the Peace Management Initiative, churches has helped inform policymakers and police personnel how to address the key issues that the churches are faced in these communities.
Mr. Speaker, I personally sat on a board with Bishop Delfour Davis. He is passionate about...
All right, there goes the bell. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you, debaters, for this riveting exchange. We now pause for 1 minute to allow you to gather your thoughts and get ready for the exchanges, the reply exchanges, beginning with that from the opposition team. Teams, your 1 minute pause begin now. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to get to the end of this enthralling debate. At this time, I call upon the reply speaker, the third speaker from the opposition team, to conclude the opposition's case. Here.
Mr. Speaker, let us remember Poochie, a 14-year-old girl from inner city who faithfully attended church weekly. Yes, when the church found out she was pregnant, they removed her from the choir and put her on the famous backbench to reflect on her moral failing. This is the church, the policy proposition wants us to celebrate. The state gave her antenatal care, kept her in school, and supported her family. That is what we, the opposition, support. The state, not discriminating, not ostracizing, but caring for all Jamaicans, no matter the circumstance. Team Proposition has given an overview of how the work of the church is beneficial to the nation, and we say kudos. The nation is grateful and celebrates the charity's charity work and contribution to infrastructure. However, that contribution should not guarantee a policy-making authority. Today, the proposition had one job: to prove that the church's influence over public policy deserves celebration. They did not. Let's examine the clashes. Why should we celebrate? One, the defining term in the moot is celebrate. celebrate based on our definition, that is to publicly praise and mark as important or worthy. The proposition has ignored this completely. They have softened celebrate to recognize, value, and appreciate. That is not the moot. They conceded some harms, then said, on the scale, the good outweighs the bad, and that is worth celebrating. We have accepted the goodness of the church, outreach, community work, mentorship, infrastructure. These are all a part of the church's doctrine and mandate, which should continue. But what does the argument really require? Proposition claims that the good outweighs the bad across the full range of the church's policy influence. Where is the proof? Proposition has not provided it. My second speaker laid out a plethora of documented harm, policy paralysis, suppressed public health, and selective citizenship. We are waiting on Proposition to provide their evidence to say that the scale tilted towards good. The church's influence on policy has not been marked as worthy. Point to the opposition. Clash 2, democracy and the unelected. Democracy derives its legitimacy from two things: equal citizenship and constitutional accountability. The church is not elected by the population. It is not answerable to the citizens at large. It answers only to itself. The proposition may have argued that the church is a trusted civic voice exercising free speech. Most civic lobbies can be voted on, audited, and removed through the democratic process, but not the church. It publishes no outcome data. Its authority rests on doctrine without evidence. Need proof? Our very government confirmed this on parliamentary record in June 2023. No path to collide with the church, even in the presence of challenges. A constitutional guarantee given to an unelected institution. The Office Against a Person Act was written in 1864 and has not been reformed to date. The minister told us why. Not because the evidence supports it, but because the government will not risk colliding with the church. Our government is more accountable to the religious pressure than to the citizens who elected it. Can Jamaica truly be democratic? No, it cannot, and that is why we oppose. Point to opposition. 3, infrastructure and charity means control of policy. Proposition indicated that church has earned the trust and every bit of its influence on policy. The schools preferred by Jamaicans were built by the church. Again, thank you. The Ministry of Education still sets the curriculum and hears disciplinary matters. Religious education is only one subject. Also, no school forces participation in Christian practices. I know, I went to Immaculate Conception High School. The church provides the building, but the state dictates the education of all Jamaicans: Hindi, Muslim, Rastafari, and Christian alike. Public policy binds every citizen, not just the Christian believers. The church has used its accumulative social capital to resist reform that would protect Jamaica's most vulnerable citizens: women, HIV victims, LGBTQ, Poochie. We have examined cases such as the tragic legal uncertainties of Roe versus Wade, and by contrast, the Nordic countries, or even Costa Rica, which made a clear separation between church and state. These nations prove that societies do not need privileged church influence over governance to be stable, moral, or successful. These countries rely on evidence. Point to opposition. Mr. Speaker, the proposition asks this House to celebrate. Celebrate an institution that backbench a 14-year-old girl. Celebrate an institution so fragmented they're suing themselves over a church building. Celebrate influence that has frozen evidence-based reform, suppressed public health, and left Jamaica's most vulnerable citizens to carry the cost. We put the church's contribution on the scale, and we put the outcomes on the other side. The scale does not balance. Christ himself drew the line. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Public policy, the law that binds every Jamaican, believer and non-believer alike, is Caesar's domain. It must answer to every citizen through the ballot. Let the pulpit guide the faith. Let parliament govern the nation. Let the church mentor Poochie child, and let the state protect Poochie herself. Jamaica's a democracy, not a theocracy. We proudly oppose this moot. Amen.
Thank you very much for that really strong finish to the opposition's case. We now call upon the proposition reply speaker to conclude the proposition's case and the debate overall. Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, let me just extend my heartfelt sympathies and empathy to Poochie. God bless her, poor child. But let me first of all start by demystifying a lot of things in this debate. The opposition talks about privileged influence. The proposition has not made that case. The proposition has told you that the church has earned its influence because of its social capital, because of the fact that it represents the majority of the people of the country, and therefore, as a democratic matter, that influence is legitimate. So let me go to the argument of democratic legitimacy. The opposition seems to believe that because the minority's view did not win out in the end, then it is undemocratic. Mash down that lie. Because, ladies and gentlemen, all the minority groups that the opposition have pointed to have appeared before the parliament. They have made parliamentary submissions. They have lobbied lawmakers. The fact that your viewpoint did not win out does not mean democracy has failed. It does not. And further, Mr. Speaker, it could become a situation that over time the minority's view will win out. We've already pointed to you that casino gambling and general gambling did eventually win out in the end. So that argument does not even factor in this debate because we're saying to you democracy is a majoritarian project. By its nature, that's what it is. Now, if they could prove to you that the viewpoints of the minority had been silenced, we would have lost. But they can't prove that to you, and so they must lose. They've also told you factual inaccuracies to tell you that minority groups have been, the doors of the court have been slammed in their face. J-Flag initiated through one of its activists the constitutional challenge. The Democratic Court rejected the challenge. The church was an intervener, like any other social group with a vested interest in an issue before the courts or the parliament. That is democracy. They point you to policy paralysis, and they hinge that argument on Roe versus Wade. They can't show you one single policy in Jamaica that is advanced or influenced by the church that has resulted in policy paralysis. This is not true. Let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, in fact, we've had extraordinary policy cohesion because the majority of our lawmakers profess the Christian faith, and therefore their viewpoint, again, as a democratic matter, must be influenced by their viewpoint. If they want a no-confidence motion or a motion of conscience where people vote based on their conscience, or if they want a situation where the population directly tells the lawmakers how to vote, then they can advocate for that. But that's not the debate we're having. We're having a debate as to whether the influence of the church should be celebrated. And we're saying to you, because they represent that majority of cohesive Christian belief, it should be celebrated. I go to the argument of the one church that my friend raises, a straw man if ever I saw one. The Christian church remains intact. The Catholic Church is intact. The Anglican Church in Jamaica is intact. The Baptist in Jamaica is intact. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is intact. Citing extremist breakaway fringe groups, which, by the way, always happens in religion, does not defeat the fact that the church, one church, my friend, remains intact. I want to talk a little bit about corrective actions for the wrongs my friends point to. Because Brandon told you, don't forget it, that the church inherently self-corrects. And we say a lot of reparatory justice has already taken place. The Pope apologized for slavery. The Anglican Archbishop of Canterbury accepted, and not only accepted, but put in place a reparatory justice fund for racial injustice to right those wrongs. They've also accepted in countries like Ireland how they treated women was wrong, and they apologized for that kind of a thing. So citing the Offenses Against the Persons Act, which the majority of Jamaicans, I have to keep stressing, support. It stands as law because it is supported by the majority. And the fact that it makes my friends uncomfortable does not make it illegitimate. That's not how democracy works. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no policy paralysis. Now, finally, the point of education and health. Why should the church influence public policy? And why did we bring those arguments to you? Because as the major stakeholder in terms of governance of schools, and my friend is not correct to say that all the churches do is own the buildings. She said she went to Immaculate. I'm a Roman Catholic. The government does not appoint the chairman of the board of Immaculate or any of those Christian schools. It is the prerogative of the church. So they influence governance in that way. And because they influence governance, they must also influence the policy that shapes the schools that they run. That is democratic legitimacy. Ladies and gentlemen, this social capital has been accumulated. It has been earned. It is valid. It should be celebrated. Bless you.
Thank you and amen. Indeed, we're grateful for the contributions of all the debaters in this match. And it is with a sense of delight that I turn over now to Tamika to conclude us, certainly conclude this segment.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Jermaine. Thank you to our teams. Give them another round of applause. Our teams, the Accountant General's Department and the National Environment and Planning Agency, they debated the moot. Be it resolved that the influence of the church over public policy in Jamaica is to be celebrated. Who will join the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Teaching Service in our semi-final match? Whose prayers will be answered? Will it be the Nepal? Will it be AGD? Or maybe it will be Poochie? We'll wait and see. Our judges will now take a short break to adjudicate and come back with the results of this match. Please stay tuned.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back and we have the results of this match that was so exciting. A match between the Accountant General's Department in proposition, and on opposition we had the NEPA team standing in opposition of the moot that looked at whether or not the church's influence on public policy is something to be celebrated. We think that the teams did really, really well, and the scores reflected 279 points as compared to 282 points. A round of applause is in fact deserving for both teams. Now, I confess, I love a debate about religion, right? Yes, and I love a debate that is philosophical and rich, and I think this debate was just that. The proposition team opens with a justification for the celebration of the church. They make a concession. They say the church has authored a lot of ills, a lot of wrongs within the society over centuries, and even now. The church isn't squeaky clean, but the church has contributed, according to them, enormously to the development of policy, and the church has earned for itself significant social capital. They speak about education, they speak about healthcare, they speak about a number of things about which the church has really advanced the society in a significant way, right? We feel like the opposition's case, though, highlighted a lot of those detrimental effects that existed and still exist today in their world with respect to the contributions of the church. They highlighted Pooch. And by the way, we met Pooch in the deliberation room. She gave me a message for both of you. I'll tell you afterwards. Right, but the church, its contribution has been deleterious, they say, and the church has an outsized footprint in terms of public policy. And now the significance and the largest of the church's contribution is justified again by proposition insofar as they say upwards of 90% of Jamaicans subscribe to the Christian faith, and that lends to a democratic kind of view that says when the church speaks, the church is speaking on behalf of the vast majority of Jamaicans, right? I think opposition tries to kind of disaggregate that to say, well, the church is confused and disunited. In fact, we have disparate views emanating from the church, and that is somehow a reflection of the church being ill-suited to contribute as it does currently to national discourse or discourse on public policy. I think the proposition stands strong with respect to that contention. Does the fragmentedness of the church make it less suited to contribute to the discourse surrounding public policy or sort of calibrating public policy in its favor, right? The proposition gives two lines of responses. They say, one, that it's a democracy, and you will need to have disparate voices even within a singular community like the church being expressed, and that's sort of healthy. But then they say that the disparate views that opposition contends exist. It's a fringe perspective, and the mainstream churches are united, are consistent, and that is good. The second point they raise is the idea that the church is has a capacity to self-correct. So in response to opposition's sort of enumeration of the various ills that the church has wrought upon the society, they say that the church self-corrects. The church has demonstrated a capacity to reflect on the ills that it has brought about within the society, and it has on multiple occasions done the right thing. Like, for example, the church's stance on LGBT rights or reparations, and establishing a commission and a fund to support the reparations overall. Right? So we think that those are definite manifestations of the church being an evolving institution. One of the questions that popped in our heads, though, as a panel of adjudicators, is to the extent that the church has done so much wrong, as is outlined by side opposition, does the church get off scot-free, if you will, or does the church get to be celebrated because the church comes to a point in its history where it decides that what it has been doing all along is wrong? What are the ills that the church has wrought over time? Should the church not be held accountable still for these particular kinds of issues? Again, we don't get a particular that kind of response from opposition, but certainly it's an interesting idea that popped in our minds as a panel of adjudicators. On the question of democracy, we think that the proposition team provides quite a nuanced interpretation of what a democracy, what a liberal democracy even is. They say, one, that all voices get an opportunity to have a say in the formulation of public policy. So views that are diametrically opposed to that of the dominant church groups, they all are welcomed to have a say. And then the politician, the policymakers, the legislators, then taking all the ideas will come to formulate what the public policy is or what the legislation is, right? We think that that is a real and an honest reflection of what obtains in the Jamaican context, right? Now, opposition at times contends that the other groups, the groups that are distant from the church in terms of their philosophy and their ideology, that they are somehow being squeezed out, relatively speaking, because of the dominance of the church, and that is bad. But insofar as the church is reflecting the ethos, the views of the majority of Jamaicans, we're unclear as to why that particular strong view in a majoritarian concept should be restricted to allow for the views of minor perspectives to be articulated. We're unsure of that. We also think that some of the ideas that we get from opposition, for example, LGBT rights being curtailed, or the progressive move towards abortion not being had because the church is sort of stifling that kind of progress, we think that that is an interesting and a consistent view we get from our opposition, but we're unclear as to why this matters. Why is it that the church stands with respect to the formulation of public policy, which adheres to a view that retards progress, and I'm sort of using words that seemingly favor opposition here, but it seems to retard progress in terms of the advancement of women's rights, sexual health rights, and so forth. We're unsure as to why that is the way to go. Why is that fundamentally a preferable path relative to the path that exists right now, which is one of more conservatism and so forth. So I think opposition needed to have done a lot more, a bit more, to prove that the ban on abortion that exists in the Jamaican context, or the sort of prohibition on sexual rights or sexual rights of women, rather, with respect to their sexual health, that is inimical to a sort of a fundamentalist view on how a democracy should be constructed. So again, deeper analysis was certainly needed. The metric on which we are given to the metric on which we assess the debate given to us by side proposition is this idea of democracy and how it is that democracy is both majoritarian, and on the other hand, it is also a construct that lends itself to catering to minority perspectives through the preservation of minority rights through the Constitution and so forth. All right? Again, we think an interesting pushback could have been potentially that in a concept like Jamaica, in a society like Jamaica, where the church is so very dominant, some rights of minority groups are not enshrined, are not protected within the Constitution. And so to simply rely on the constitutional protections as they exist, arguably is inadequate. Opposition. Okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, these are just some of the ideas that sort of we reflected on when we deliberated, but again, a really, really interesting exchange of ideas between both teams. We think that the winner, certainly, well, not we think, we know that the winner will advance to the semifinals of this competition, and deservingly so, but it is not to the, it doesn't reflect a gross ineptness on the part of the team that loses this debate for having ultimately ended their journey here in the competition at this stage. So, the winners of this competition, winning on 282 points, ladies and gentlemen, it's a team from the Accountant General's Department, Team Proposition. So congratulations to the Proposition team on advancing to the semi-final round of the public sector debate competition. Very well tried. Close behind them, the team from NEPA. The best debater in this match actually comes to us from NEPA. Ladies and gentlemen, it is and I invite Tamika Goodmighty to step forward with the beautiful gift basket to hand over to the second speaker from Team NEPO. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as they say, that's how the cookie crumbles. Congratulations to the winning team, Team AGD, and commendations on a job well done, Team NEPO. Our journey through the quarterfinal round of this competition comes to an end, but we look forward to seeing you in about 2 weeks or so from now, when the 4 teams who would have advanced to the semi-final round duke it out to determine who gets to the grand final round of this competition. Until then, take care.